I will call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Education, which was duly noticed on July 7th, 2023, through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin State Statute 1984. And moving on to Pledge of Allegiance.
I can leave it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Most of the time.
Play ball.
Can I have a motion to adopt the July 11th, 2023 Board of Education? Sorry?
So moved.
Yes. Sorry. Kevin and Greg?
Hi, yes.
Yes, thank you. You got that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 7-0. Lisa and Liz are absent tonight. Safety message, Greg Ardrey.
Keep this rather quick. Given no rain, wildfires exist, quite a few. Actually here in our state, and one rather large one. I found this out this morning because I did not know about it. In Coloma and Washoe County, between Coloma and Watoma, about 800, a little over 800 acres have burned. And I was driving up to a rebuild project, and I had a little detour, turn around, come back home. But really it's just, and it was really debris burning from several days ago. So it's a good reminder that when you are doing some burning, things can stay hot for several days beyond just the day you had. So you have to really go expeditiously to put the fire out. But more importantly, this is the wrong time to be doing that anyway because of simply how dry things are. So just things to remember, and make sure that we don't start a critical fire because that has a huge impact. So thank you.
Thank you.
Greg?
Definitely not aware of that. No citizen comments, I assume? Okay, thank you. All right, consider approval to offer the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Kevin, second by Carl. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 7-0. Thank you. 5.1, consider approval of resolution authorizing IHO for our district. Mr. Garner.
Motion for approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Kevin, second by Greg. Any discussion?
Actually, I have a question, or maybe more of a comment. I know the options that we have, and what we really haven't ever really talked about is like the pros and cons of each of those. I don't believe any of us has been there before when the board listened to each individual one. So I would just say in the future, if we could go pros and cons of the different options, that would be great. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? That passes 7-0. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Good
Yeah,
job.
good job. Consider approval of recommended appointment of Sarah Garrick as IHO for our
Motion
district.
for approval.
Second.
Motion made by Kevin, second by Greg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks again, Scott. Passes 7-0. Presentation and consider approval of preliminary budget for 23-24. Mr. McCray.
Okay, so we had a really good Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee yesterday. So 4 of the individuals of the 7 had the opportunity, so we'll be going over some very similar information. But certainly it's an action item for the board's consideration. You'll have in your board packet a memo in addition to a PowerPoint. We're going to kind of bounce back and forth between the two. And certainly I'll entertain your questions throughout this evening's presentation. The ink, if you will, is relatively still new on the governor's budget, or I should say the budget that was signed by the governor just really about 5 business days ago. So until it really becomes law, if you will, it's really hard to say, okay, this is exactly what we're going to have, because in part, we don't know what's going to come about as a line item veto as an option, right? And we saw a very interesting demonstration of that by the governor, right, in terms of for 400 plus years, essentially indicating that school districts will be allowed to increase their revenue limit per member by $325. Now, we'll see what happens at the next biennial budget. I believe it was maybe Mr. Hannawall who asked the question last evening, so could anything change? And for the most part, probably slim to none in terms of any changes within the current biennial budget. Now, I think there's maybe some, brouhaha, if you will, in terms of beyond the next biennial budget, what will happen. And really, we don't know, but we certainly know what we have, if you will, for this biennial budget. Of course, everyone is very familiar. We have 2 goals, if not 3 for the district, right? Certainly reading, talking about algebra, and then certainly attendance, right? And so as we build a budget, does a budget support those goals? Secondly, we'll go into a little bit in terms of, as everyone knows, there's a number of school district finance variables, everything from revenue limit to salary and benefits to debt service, property values, equalization aid, tax levy, many, many factors within school finance. We're not going to touch all of those. We'll save that for October, but we're going to hit some highlights. And those highlights really begin with general equalization aid. So you may recall we adopted some budget assumptions, right? And we essentially said, well, we're going to assume status quo in equalization aid, right? And we'll see an increase in equalization aid. Probably not as much as we would like to see, because simply when you have an increase in revenue limit authority, you're hoping to perhaps counterbalance that with equalization aid. That's not necessarily happening for us as a district, because the more aid you get is, as a district, right, it's really less property taxes. It's not additional dollars to spend. So in year 1 of the biennial budget, you'll see just over $154 million thrown into the pot, which is essentially just over $5.2 billion that all Wisconsin K-12 school districts compete for, and then an additional $379 million in the next year of the biennial budget. We originally looked at increasing special ed reimbursement from the current 30% to about 35%. All right, that did not happen, right? So essentially it's going from just approximately 30% to 33.3%. And again, Mr. Hannawall asked a great question in terms of, well, what's up with the approximation? It's some certain. So all 422 school districts compete for some certain pot of money. And depending upon, right, that percentage could be lower, right? So as we all compete for that. So it's not necessarily some sufficient, right? It's really a finite amount of dollars. Our transfer typically, right, in the School District of Janesville is just over $12 million. So if we saw that number increase, that reduces our transfer, which allows for additional revenue to be applied to Fund 10 expenses, right? So when we take 12 million out, right, if that number were to shrink within our revenue limit authority, that allows us to spend dollars elsewhere rather than a transfer, right? So we were hoping for a higher transfer, as was Governor Evers. It came in much less. So we factored in 5, it's coming in at 3.3% approximately. When we look at the per member revenue limit increase, we originally budgeted 0. Again, very conservatively, and as everyone saw, right, essentially it's $325 per member in year 1, an additional $325 per member in year 2. Again, that's a 3-year rolling average. Again, a question was asked last night, so what's the difference between membership and enrollment? Right, our enrollment number is much higher than our membership number. Membership are our students who attend our schools and reside in our district or attend schools outside of our district but continue to reside in our district. That's a member. And it's really tied to open enrollment in and open enrollment out. If we have students residing in Janesville and open enroll out, they're still a member for us for revenue limit calculation purposes. If they're a student that enrolls in, they're just a pupil and will receive open enrollment dollars for that. The low revenue limit ceiling. This, quite frankly, was a huge surprise in terms of increasing revenue limit ceiling. Now, we get into these discussions in terms of, is it a ceiling, is it a floor? For us, it's $10,002 per student. That was our current 22-23 revenue limit per member, outside of any other exemptions, such as a non-recurring referendum, which is what we have. It's our base revenue per member. Okay, I had and shared with the committee last night kind of where we ranked within the county, and we were last, I believe, off the top of my head, right? There's a few of us right around 10,000. Clinton goes to north of 12,003 per member. We're at 10,000. So conceivably, they have $2,300 more to spend per student than what we do in the School District of Janesville. Now, again, the operating referendum helps us, but in terms of a true line indicator on the revenue limit, it's $10,000. That's increasing to $11,000, right? And as I alluded to earlier, we would have hoped that there's going to be an offset in equalization aid, because that's an increase, if you will, to our local taxpayers, right? We'll be taxing more. Now, Superintendent Holtzman said, well, are we, as a district, are our taxpayers going to pick up all $1,000 of that? That was a question he asked last night. And the answer is no, because again, we're a highly aided school district, so it's a distribution, right? And so essentially it's, if you will, the governor and the state's approach to move back towards 2/3 funding from an aggregate revenue standpoint. And we're not going to go in this evening in terms of the 3 different levels of equalization aid and how they apply to offset the $1,000 increase in revenue limit authority, right? But it's not necessarily taking $1,000 and passing that on directly to taxpayers. It's a distribution of equalization aid and revenue limit authority. Per pupil categorical aid, we had modeled a $100 increase per pupil, right? And again, that's a pupil, right? A little bit different than a member in the district, right? And it came in at 0, right? Because all the money, if you will, was moved into increases in per member revenue limit authority, right? Rather than per student categorical aid. This next slide just really kind of gives you a quick history, going back about 10 years in terms of revenue limit adjustments, as well as the revenue limit ceiling per member, right, and per pupil categorical aid. So you can see that revenue limit in column 2, we've not necessarily kept pace with inflation, right? You can see, though, that there have been instances where our low revenue limit ceiling, has increased over time, fairly conservatively. And then you can see that while you not necessarily have increases in revenue limit authority per pupil, right, we did receive, as all school districts did, per pupil adjustment aid, right? But you can see, if you look to the right column there, it's been frozen for quite some time at $742 per year. That's not $742 plus another $742 plus another $742, it's $742. Okay, this gets a little small, right? So, but it is in your packet, and I really just kind of want to bring your attention to the 4 arrows on the right. Not that it's a misdirect, right? But those are really kind of some highlights. You'll see the first arrow is per pupil revenue limit increases, and what we do is we use a forecast model, and so we're making those adjustments in our forecast model of $325 per member. Right, there's some other numbers there, and if you look closely, you'll kind of see our Fund 10 revenues and Fund 10 expenditures, right? In the memo, you'll see a combination between Fund 10 and Fund 27. So if you say, well, that number's wrong, the number's correct, but in the memo, it's a combination of both 10 and 27. The model really just focuses on Fund 10. If you go down to the modeled levy increase, and again, it's a modeled levy increase, right? The board needs to take action on this in October, right? Is you will see essentially a jump from an anticipated 46.9 to 49 and 253. Those are increases because of the district's increased revenue limit authority that the district is allowed to levy. All right, what we've been trying to do, and we went into some detail last night, is to really hold our levy, right, by managing our debt service, right, at 46.9, 46.9, 46.9. All right, so we've lost that opportunity because of the allowable increases in revenue limit authority. If you go down to the operational referendum, of course, we're factoring that in. We will be in year 3 of 4 of an operational referendum, and the value of that is $11.5 million. You said, well, Dan, you're going to take that low revenue limit ceiling and you're going to take that operational referendum. So somewhat, how close are we in terms of your levy per member? Right? And essentially that brings us to about $12,264. You say, well, that's much higher than where we were in the past. And you say, absolutely. It's almost on par with Clinton in Rock County. Right? And then you say, well, that's Rock County. How do we compare with our peers? And we went into this. It's not a slide as part of the slide deck this evening, right? But I'll give you an example. Right? Some prairies just north of 12.5. Verona's, Middleton, Cross Plains are in those same general areas. And those, if you will, as you know, are athletic conference comparables. Right? So we're moving up in terms of the revenue per member with our peer group. And then you'll notice the fourth arrow there is really our debt levy. And while we may have seen increases in our operational levy, managing our debt service is what we've been afforded the opportunity to do. And the board and the district is taking advantage of levying in advance on its debt service. Because we're seeing more of an increase on the operational side, we really have to scale that back. Right? So keep in mind, right, the city of Janesville, I misspoke yesterday, is looking at a 30. It's actually, when I was visiting with Ryan McHugh, it's close to a 44%, per his words, property revaluation. That's why, in some respect, we were really targeting that levy of 46.9, because it affords the district, as well as you as board members, to say, we've been consistent with our levy, right? We've lost that opportunity to be consistent with our levy, right, simply because of the granted increases in revenue limit authority. This is just, and again, we're not going to go through this, but you have it for your review, is just taking a look, if you will, at a long-term perspective with what we know today. And as I shared last night with the committee, right, so the best predictor of the future is the past, right? And so we've not necessarily been very consistent in terms of receiving revenue limit increases or increases in per student categorical A. But we can only work with what we know today, which is also why we budget rather conservatively. So when we roll things in, right, to the budget, right, we're assuming increases in revenues and we're assuming corresponding increases in expenses. And you'll see a little bit on an upcoming slide exactly what it is that we're looking to and bring forth to the board in the coming months. But we're showing balanced. Last night we talked a little bit about recurring versus non-recurring. With additional revenue limit authority, particularly in year 1 and 2, right, if we went and said, okay, we're going to take that, we're going to apply it to recurring expenses. They're going to happen every year in perpetuity. All right, that would really set us up for deficits in the future. All right, and so this is why we take a look, if you will, at are there opportunities for one-time expenditures, right, or at least once every decade type of expenditure. Right? Is there a way for us to take Fund 10 and manage our debt service in Fund 49 via a transfer? Right? Are there other opportunities that we may be able to explore? It was difficult to run through all those scenarios, right, because we didn't necessarily know what we were going to have until just really, again, 5 business days ago. So the board's about to embark upon a strategic planning process. But even outside of that, like, we need to continue to always be planning from a fiscal perspective as well as from a programmatics perspective. Right, so we know overarching, right, there are five things for us to consider. You know, we need to continue to attract and retain staff. You know, we spoke a little bit about how, right, the candidate pool for our positions is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Right, and so when Kim and Chris and Allison and others are looking for staff, right, that's a smaller pool. And not only are we competing with other districts, right, we're almost competing amongst ourselves. Right, so if Jennifer Fanning has an opening at Kennedy and that same candidate is interviewing at Lincoln, right, it becomes a very interesting dynamic for us as a district, right, which goes back to kind of the fourth bullet point there in terms of how are we addressing our facility and campus needs over the long term. We're not going to be able to solve that issue immediately, right, but we need to be thinking long term and not just the immediate. Curricular resources. We've really leaned upon, all right, ESSER to fund both the Wonders and Bridges curricular adoptions, right? And so Allison and her team have really focused on a 6-year adoption cycle and how do we continue to support that because we've been using federal grant money. All right, so how do we weave that into our budget to essentially acknowledge the recurring costs of that type of investment over time? Technology and infrastructure, right? Again, using some pandemic-related dollars outside of ESSER, we've made significant investments in our technology, right? This year, we're going to continue to make those types of investments, but with local dollars, right? And just, if you will, kind of managing our budget fairly well, but that is not going to go away, right? In terms of those types of investments. And it's beyond a one-to-one, right? It's our wireless, right? And it's also the tools that we use within the classroom. And even going back to curricular resources, right? For those who've been on the board a long time, right? You may think of the old PEP grant, right? And so we were able to invest in physical education equipment, right? That's really aged out. And those are significant investments that need to be replaced. So just going back to curricular, it's more than textbooks and workbooks, right? It's manipulatives, it's other equipment, whether that's a welder or what have you, right? Going back to curricular resources. And then facility and campus needs, right? So the board's been extremely supportive, right, of the administration perspective of we need to assess what we have, right, before we begin to plan for the future. So we're about to embark upon that, but we know we perhaps have a hot button or two that we would like to address, right? So now we may have additional resources to which we can do that. But we still need to do that even within the context of a greater facility-wide planning and not like, we need to address issues, but how does that play into the overall plan? Not that we have to wait, right, but we just need to be very cognizant of our decision making. And then we have our debt service, right? And going back, which we won't, but we see a little bit, and there's an assumption built into the model. Oops, going the wrong way. Right, of some, if you look to essentially 25 and beyond to the debt service line, which is towards the bottom of the sheet, there is an assumption, if you will, of additional debt, and I'll leave it at that, right? But you'll see a bit of a camel's hump, if you will, in the 25, 26 year, right? And so it's an appeal, and when we ask, should the board so choose to make an appeal to local taxpayers, right? How do we make an investment in not only our classroom, but our facilities appealing, right? And so we just really, as the board, and as we have done, is how do we manage our debt? So there may be an opportunity to address that roughly 11.3 million. Okay, just to kind of begin to smooth that out. So again, as we share with finance, you know, we need a little bit of time, right, to, okay, how do we address some of these larger ticket items that may be on the docket? How do they weave into our long-term facilities planning? And then not only from a long-term facilities planning, but from a curricular standpoint where we know we need some additional investment because we won't have ESSER dollars, right, on a 6-year curriculum renewal cycle. So those are just some things. In addition to going back, right, it is about the individual in the classroom, the attraction and retain from a compensation, from a benefit standpoint, right? But, you know, we need to provide the teachers and staff in our classrooms the tools so they can execute their craft. So I'm going to move off of this, just quickly to the memo. Thanks. And so what you have on page 2, right, is a combination of a preliminary Fund 10 and 27 at the aggregate level. You know, as I shared at finance, like I can't give you how much we're spending on Post-it notes, how much photocopier, what our utilities are going to look like. We really look to a cast forward. Again, people are approximately 80% of our budget. All right, we've done the staffing plan already. although there are always these hotspots that we're monitoring. Okay. So you have those two figures in there, right? You have last year's as a comparable, and again, those are unaudited. You'll see the increase in the revenue limit authority, and you're going to say that goes up, but I want you to continue to read and understand that there's an offset in equalization aid, right? So the full value of just over 11 is not really the full value because of the offset. Keep in mind, there are a lot of factors still yet to be determined, right? You hear me say this every year. All right, we'll start to get an inkling in terms of what the district's equalized property value is going to be when that's released to municipalities in August. We won't have our figure, right, until October. We have the September 3rd Friday count, right? And that's where we're going to take a look at open enrollment as well as just our own membership. And unfortunately, we've seen a decline in open enrollment since 2019-20. Right? And so we see a little bit of an uptick relative to our open enrollment out, while open enrollment in has been relatively steady. You're going to say, well, that doesn't sound too bad, until I say we were approximately $1.5 million in net revenue, and this year we finished at under $400,000 in net revenue. Right? So when we work through the budget cycle and you go, well, what happened to that 1.1? Well, this is where when we look to staffing and other programmatic issues and perhaps reductions, we need to close that. So then also in October, we'll get our final equalization aid, and then again, our final property values. And then we'll be prepared for the annual meeting. But lots of work to do between now and then. Any questions?
Thank you. You touched on it briefly, but how much more time do we have to use ESSER dollars? And, you know, when's the drop dead date for ESSER dollars? And has all those dollars been already earmarked for?
I would say all those dollars have been earmarked for. Occasionally what happens is there may be a position or an opportunity we're unable to fund because of recruitment, so then that kind of naturally frees up some dollars. Right, and I'll give you just an example. Last year we had 5 PAC advocates to focus on attendance. If, let's say, for some odd reason we didn't hire one until October, that theoretically frees up some dollars until that individual starts to receive compensation in October. So that's just a quick example. The funds need to be expended no later than September 30th, 2024. And a vast majority, not vast, probably about half of those funds is we're making an investment in Franklin from a conditioned air perspective. Right? So we're really kind of obligated those dollars, but I would mislead you if I were to say every dollar and every penny, simply because there's just some fluidity within that budget.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to follow up with you. You had asked a question regarding Fund 46 at the last meeting, right? And since we're talking a little bit about budget, I'll go down that pathway. So Fund 46 is, I think I referenced it as a long-term maintenance fund. It is a long-term capital improvement fund, right? So it's not just necessarily related to replacing or repairing existing. So you can expand upon that. So I think you may be related to, can we do some athletic field improvements, or can we do some bleacher improvements? Technically, yes, we could. I believe I was most likely confused because there's also a Fund 41, which is really targeted within the district's revenue limit authority for capital maintenance. And sometimes the language is a little bit vague, but most likely Fund 41, or I shouldn't say most likely, Fund 41 is truly geared towards maintenance. 46 does allow you for some improvement.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Motion for approval?
Second. There's a motion by Kevin, second by Kathy. I just have one question. Can you speak to the non-recurring referendum dollars? I always forget this number. So it goes up 4 million, except for next year goes up 3. Was that not a certain amount each year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, sorry for the feedback. We structured it a little bit just to really look at kind of some highs and lows when we were initially planning, right? And then just also trying to manage the levy. And we're going back to, like, August of 2020, right, when we were doing that. So I think first year was like, 3.5, then 7.5, then 11.5, and then obviously 14.5. So some were 3, some were 4. It made sense at the time. It still is kind of working out, but yeah, I just don't recall exactly why, other than we were looking at the model, we were anticipating revenues, expenditures, state aids, and things like that, and that seemed to make sense to roll it out that way. It's not uncommon to do a step referendum. The other thing that one in some districts will do is you'll say the full value of that, off the top of my head, is, let's say, 37 million. Right, and some would say, well, divide by 4 and levy that each year, to which then you would have a significant fund balance at the end of the year, right? And then you would feed off of your fund balance for the duration. So you go kind of fat, and then you get really thin, but you're working off of your fund balance. That's a huge impact in year 1. If you were to say, well, let's just keep the math simple and say 40 million. Well, year 1's 10, right? Versus we staggered that up, stepped it up, I should say.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
So if we look at targeting a number that we are approving, would it be accurate to say we are approving roughly $167 million in total for spending?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Question,
Sorry, oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
what are we voting on? I mean, are we voting on the number that Greg just, the preliminary budget number? Okay,
Logically, as you've said, if that's fluid and that's gonna change, certainly by October probably, right? Because there's still a lot of factors.
Yes and no, right? So let's go with, as Commissioner Ardrey suggested, right? So as you see in the memo, it's approximately 166 million. It's certainly the board's prerogative, but it's not going to swing dramatically.
Okay.
It's not gonna swing by millions and millions of dollars, right? So essentially, the action today is to more or less say, we started a new fiscal year, we need to spend money, we have obligations during the summer, and we're obligating dollars for the start of school, right? So we won't spend all 160+ million dollars, right? So we have some. If, let's say, all of a sudden we see a swing in net open enrollment revenue, right? Well, that just provides us some additional revenue, to which then we need to have a corresponding expense.
Okay.
Right, so the number, dare I say, but I'll go back to when MD Roffers provided their enrollment projections, right? The number will be wrong. But we're fairly close, because to your point, it's early, it's July.
Right, so I guess that's why I was wondering, what's the value of approving a number this early? Just so that you have a starting spot?
Yeah, it's, dare I say, it's tradition, right? Somewhere probably buried in state statute, right, is the authorization to continue to make payments on behalf of the district.
All right, thanks.
Great question.
So historically, Commissioner Hannawell, we had operated without having a preliminary budget approved. So you get to October, the end, and then we will officially approve a budget. And I really pushed us to at least have a preliminary authorization that, yes, you can execute based on what we have in front of us. We know it's not final, but you do actually have authorization to spend some money.
so there's no surprise.
Correct, yeah. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Janesville Way Forward Strategic Plan Update, Mr. Holzman?
Yes, thank you. We have a meeting scheduled for Monday, July 17th, with our committee to review our potential partners. And we'll listen to their feedback and opportunity on how they might help move us forward with this process. Our goal would then be to provide information to the board at the next upcoming board meeting. To say it's been a little challenging to get both our business partners and committee members all together for a date. So we're confident that we'll have a small group ready for Tuesday, and we'll listen to what they have to say about how they might help move us forward. So we're anxious to do that. I'll give the board some preliminary updates through my memos throughout the week, but Monday we have the committee. That committee includes Elizabeth from the board, Dave Heller from our community, Allison, myself, and Jessica Grant Turk from the elementary building. So we'll listen to what they have to say, and we'll report back to you next board meeting.
Thank you. That reminds me that the FBG meeting voice recording will be sent in a link to in your next update, right? Didn't we talked about that this morning?
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, so that'd be a good one if you couldn't be here last night. I couldn't be here, but it was a really good meeting, so to kind of just catch up on that to listen to. All right, 6.1, future meeting dates and times and agenda items, board requests. I have none. Denise, do you want to do the meeting?
The PPC, the Personnel Policy and Curriculum Committee meeting will meet on Monday, August 7th at 4:30 PM here at the Educational Services Center. Our next Board of Education meeting is Tuesday, August 8th at 6 PM, also here at the Educational Services Center. The Finance Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting will meet on Tuesday, August 15th at 4 PM here at the ESC. And the second board meeting in August will be on Tuesday, August 22nd at 6 PM, also here at the Educational Services Center.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want to say congratulations to Tina on your new role. We have been very fortunate to have you, and you've done so much work with helping our district with our benefits and all the meetings and negotiations that has taken on, and the way you lead and the training for our staff and health benefits and resources for them doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you for your service to us, and good luck at Heartland.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done to help me grow to where I am today, and this team sitting here, and you know, particularly the employees out in the buildings. I love those people, and the work that we have been able to do and support for them. I am a people person. I'm about people, and I will continue to be about people. It's been a pleasure. So thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you for that. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thanks. What did you say? 6?
You had like a competition here?
We do every.
Go start?